Welcome, welcome. Yes, come in, don't be afraid. Welcome to the tour of the Papyrus of Ani. The Papyrus of Ani is a copy of the Book of the Dead. Written around 1250 BC. The Book of the Dead. Sounds scary, I know. But remember, it wasn't the Egyptians that gave it the name the Book of the Dead. It was the archaeologists that found it with all the mummies, and so they called it the Book of the Dead. The Egyptians actually gave it the name the Book of Coming Forth by Day, or the Book of Coming Forth in the Morning, which had reference to them coming back to life in the afterlife. So you've already read many of the spells from the Book of the Dead. Are you really going to mwahaha every time I say Book of the Dead? All right then. So like I said, you've read many of the spells from the book, but now we're going to tour the illustrations. The illustrations were a great part of Egyptian writing and depicted many of the symbols of their belief. As we take the tour, keep your eyes open, your hands inside the cabin at all times, and keep your mind on the realities behind the symbols. Remember, this meant something to them, and it's not the symbols that matter. It's the realities behind the symbols that matter. In front of you is the complete scroll of the Papyrus of Ani. Whoa, as you can see, it's quite long, so let's start at the very beginning. It's a very good place to start. So here we have the initiate, presumably Ani, and his wife uttering a hymn to Osiris. The hymn to Osiris begins the Book of the Dead and precedes the list of spells. Notice the ceremonial white clothing, a symbol common to many cultures, and Ani's uplifted hands in the attitude of prayer. Standing before them is a table of offerings they place before the gods. Ani's wife is carrying lotuses, symbols of life and creation. Here the two together, husband and wife, begin their journey through the underworld, or the duat, which will eventually lead them to acceptance into the court of the gods. Now that first illustration isn't too bad, pretty clear, pretty easy, but let's look at this next one. Yeah, a little bit strange. It's got lots of symbols that aren't really all that apparent what's going on. So let's talk through this. This picture is meant to represent worshiping Osiris as the rising sun. Look at the two goddesses, Isis and Nephthys. They raise their hands in worship, and they're on both sides of the Jed pillar. That's that little thing at the bottom. The Jed pillar is a symbol of strength and health. It is supporting the Ankh. The Ankh sits on top of it. The Ankh, remember, the symbol of eternal life or life in the afterlife. And that Ankh has hands which are holding up the sun. All these symbols in the middle combine to suggest continual life that rises and shines like the sun, which are all attributes of Osiris. So that middle chunk is a symbol of Osiris and his attributes. The baboons, this is one of my favorite things, the baboons surrounding the sun with outstretched hands represent worship. Why baboons? Well, this is kind of funny. We wouldn't think of that. We would think of baboons as like a symbol of mocking or making fun of something. But here they represent symbols, because to the Egyptians, baboons were known to sit and face the sun to warm their faces every morning. And so they looked at that and used that as a symbol of worship, where they turn and face the sun. So I think it's neat to think of the mighty realities of the images like this, because if you look at it right off, it's just kind of a weird collection of stuff that doesn't really mean anything, kind of like a goofy cartoon. But when you think of the meanings, it actually becomes pretty powerful and profound. So here we have two goddesses holding their hands up, worshiping these symbols of strength and health and life and light, all in the middle, surrounded by baboons that also symbolize that turning and focusing your gaze upon the god. Kind of interesting. Moving ahead, we get to one of the most iconic and dramatic vignettes of Egyptian beliefs, the weighing of the heart. This was an important sacred ritual in the afterlife for the Egyptians. This is where they were judged on the desires represented by the heart that they had. Here, Ani and his wife wait at the right to see what will become of their heart. The heart was a powerful symbol to the Egyptians. One who had possession of his heart had power to carry out his desires in the afterlife, while one who had lost it was left powerless. Remember the spells that you read when the initiate pleaded for the safety of his heart? This was a big deal. They had prayers and rituals that would help them protect their heart so that they would have that in the afterlife and have that power to carry out their desires. Here's a different picture of Ani pleading to the gods to let him keep his heart. The gods sit there and the heart sits in that canopic jar, and he is pleading with them, please allow me to keep my heart. Back to the weighing, Anubis, the jackal-headed god, prepares the scales to weigh the heart, which is on the left side of the scale in the canopic jar there. It is weighed against the ostrich feather. I love this symbol. It's the symbol of Mot, which means truth, order, law, and things as they ought to be. It's the guiding truth behind everything. If the heart weighed more than the feather, then the heart was pronounced impure. And it was fed to Ammit, that scary creature monster there on the right. Ammit's a monster conglomeration of the most dangerous animals to the Egyptians, the hippo, the alligator, and the lion. So if the heart weighed too much, it was impure. It had too much worldly stuff connected to it. It had picked up too much garbage, and it was considered impure and fed to the monster. Thoth is the bird-headed god there, or the heron-headed god. He stands between with the scribe utensils, ready to record the outcome of the weighing. He writes down what happens. So all these things are recorded. Above them sit the 12 gods who stand as witnesses to the event. It looks pretty good for Ani, since Anubis seems to be helping him out with a little extra weight and pulling down on the feather side. If he lets go, perhaps Ammit would get a little Scooby snack. So remember, did the Egyptians really believe that all this really happened in the afterlife, and all these gods had jackal heads and heron heads and they all looked like that? Well, I don't know, but remember, it's the reality that matters. And the reality of it is that the Egyptians believed their heart had to be clean from the worldliness and clean from all of the things that they could pick up in their earthly life and declared pure. And it had to be measured against truth. Their heart had to be in line with truth if they were going to progress. And if their heart was not in line with truth, it would be destroyed. In other words, they would not be able to carry out their pure desires in the afterlife. They would be limited and held back. So I think this is a beautiful representation of truth. Think about in your own life. As you go through life, do you try to keep yourself clean from the distractions of the world and the things that would kind of make your heart dirty or impure, or you don't have the greatest desires? Maybe you get selfish and you don't want to help your neighbors. This is what the Egyptians believed, is that your heart had to be kept pure. This next vignette across the top of the papyrus depicts some of the future rituals that they used for the deceased. These are things that happened back on Earth. We have a rather dramatic group of mourning women here. We'll just kind of pass by them for now. Over here we have the mummy of the deceased. This is Ani's mummy, supported by Anubis. You might be asking, why does Anubis have a jackal head? Well, in shallow graves in Egypt, the jackals would come and devour the carcasses. The Egyptians saw them running around the graveyard and used that as a symbol of someone attending to the dead. Strange, I know, but keep in mind the mighty realities of the symbol are far more important than the symbols themselves. Here also we have the priest, designated by his coat of skins. You always see the priest wearing a coat of skins like this. He's performing the opening of the mouth ritual. The priest in white ceremonial clothing to the left of the other priest, he carries the words that they're supposed to say for the ritual. The opening of the mouth is an extremely important ritual for the Egyptians. The mouth symbolized two main functions. First, the mouth breathes. For a deceased person, breath meant the return of life and power to the body. Second, the mouth speaks. The Egyptians put great emphasis on words, much like Miss Newman puts great emphasis on words. But words were the power to act, to lead, to guide. In short, it was the power to carry out the will of the heart. So the opening of the mouth meant empowering the deceased person's speech, and consequently gave him power again in the afterlife. The opening of the mouth ceremony included symbolic feeding, breathing, and opening of the mouth for the deceased, as we can see all the needed materials here for the ceremony, the food, the sticks, all that stuff they used. Here are other depictions of the ceremony. This picture is from later in the Papyrus of Ani, where they're performing the ritual of the opening of the mouth. And this one's interesting. This one is from the tomb of King Tutankhamun. Notice the consistency in all of these, of the coat of skins for the priest and the instruments used to hold the mouth open. This was a very common ritual that was done by the priests on mummies to help them progress and come to life in the afterlife. Now moving on, we have this set of pictures that depicts part of the deceased's journey through the underworld. Here we have the cat slaying the snake Apep. Apep is the snake of the underworld that represents chaos, disorder, or destruction. It's almost the opposite of the mott feather that represents truth and order and justice. So chaos and truth, these two things are kind of the opposite here. Apep, the symbol of one, the feather, the symbol of the other. It's the snake that has power to stop the sun god each night in his journey through the underworld and consequently prevent it from rising again. This snake must be slain every night. This obstacle must similarly be overcome by Ani if he's going to rise again. Here are some other depictions of the slaying of Apep. Egyptians believed that the powers of Apep, depicted as a snake, needed to be subdued by each person who traveled through the Duat, or the underworld. We can see here the depiction of the boat on its journey through the Duat, sailing with the sun towards the horizon, which meant the move into a new existence symbolized by the lion. If you crossed over the horizon, that meant you went somewhere new. So going into the west, or crossing the horizon into the west, kind of meant reaching a new life. This symbol is used all the time. For those of you who are Lord of the Rings fans, what do the elves do? The elves don't die, but they do get in boats and they journey into the west over the horizon into a new life. So this is a common symbol of kind of transversing from one existence to another. Behind the lion is the lotus, which is the symbol of life and creation. So this is kind of them moving into a new life across the horizon, but it's still symbols of life on that other side. On his journey through the Duat, the deceased would need to get through the gates where the gods stood as guards, as depicted here. See each of these gates, and there's guards of God standing in front of them. If Ani and his wife are going to get safely through the gates, they'll need to know the correct words and the correct names to pass. Luckily, we don't, so we can merely go on right here, but there is in the Book of the Dead, there is in the book a spell that can tell you all the names you need to know and all the words you need to say if you want to know. You can go look it up. Moving on, here we have Ani and his wife approaching Osiris. Isis is his wife that stands behind him. Osiris is depicted as a mummy, the symbol of death, but he has green skin, the symbol of life, even though he's died. Green was the color of life because in Egyptian it was in stark contrast to the desert. They could see the desert was brown, but then when there was life it was green. Osiris holds the staff of eternal power, the one in the middle there, as well as the crook and flail, symbols of earthly dominion and leadership qualities. His canopy is crowned with the uraei, or the snakes, which here provide protection from the enemies. The same protective snakes are also on Osiris's crown. Here's one of my favorites. I always like this, the snake with two legs. I think partly just because it makes me giggle every time I see it, a snake walking around with two legs. But this is the depiction of the spell when the deceased turns himself into a snake. Yes, this is our dear friend Ani turned into a snake. He's looking pretty good. Why would someone want to turn themselves into a snake? Remember, it's not the symbol that matters, it's the mighty reality behind the symbol. When you read the Book of the Dead, you read spell 87. It says, I am the long-lived snake. I pass the night and am reborn every day. I am a snake which is in the limits of the earth. I pass the night and am reborn, renewed, and rejuvenated every day. So here, in this case, the snake is a symbol of rebirth and regeneration. Why? Well, think about it. When snakes shed their skin, it is like they are putting off an old body and gaining a new. They symbolically are reborn every time they shed their skin, gaining new life and rejuvenating their bodies. So the Egyptians used that as a symbol of keeping your body fresh and renewed, not dying. So snakes are just another cool symbol for the Egyptians, and they can have many meanings. Think about it. There's Apep, the snake of destruction and chaos, because snakes were a dangerous animal to the Egyptians. They were poisonous and could destroy you. There's also the Uriae snakes that provide protection from destruction. They're a symbol, and snakes can also be a symbol of rebirth, as in this case, where they turn themselves into a snake so they can be reborn. The Bible has a couple of instances where snakes represent both destructive evil forces and protective benevolent forces, and this is kind of interesting because it represents both. When Moses approaches Pharaoh, he casts down his staff, which turns into a snake. Pharaoh's priests do it as well, and their staffs turn into snakes too. But it's Moses' snake that devours the other snakes. This would have been a symbol very clear to the Egyptians that Moses' snake had the protective power over the forces of the priests' snakes. Also later in the story where the children of Israel are in the wilderness, they're being plagued and bitten by snakes, and many people are dying from the poison. The Lord tells Moses to place a pole with an image of a snake on it, and if the people were bitten, all they would have to do is turn and look at the snake, and then they would be healed. Again, two types of snake, but the benevolent snake has power to protect one from the forces of the destructive snakes. These are symbols familiar to those who had recently left Egypt, and are potent images when one considers the mighty realities meant to be taught from the images. We still use that staff and snake motif in medical things. Remember the medical symbol that has kind of the cross there and the snake wrapped around it? That comes from this Egyptian story. That means that snake is there to protect you from medical harm, a symbol we still use. We'll move on now to the Declaration of Innocence. You read this spell. It's where Ani has to declare his innocence before the multitude of gods. All these things that he says he hasn't done. I haven't done this, I haven't done that, I haven't done this. All the things that he's done to declare that he's innocent. I suppose this is a rather daunting task. Think about it. You have to say all these statements in front of all the community of the gods there. This first image depicts Ani and his wife approaching Osiris. Notice again that Osiris is a mummy. He has the staff, the crook, and the flail of power. He also has the canopy protected by the snakes. In front of him he has the children of Horus. These are canopic jars meant to protect the organs of the deceased. This ensures that the organs have their proper function in the afterlife. It protects the heart and the other organs that are in them. They sit on the lotus, again a symbol of life and power and creation. Here behind Osiris sit the 42 gods, each of whom Ani must address and declare a particular point of purity and innocence. They are the tribunal which will declare Ani clean. This community of the gods is even more clearly portrayed in the Book of the Breathings. That's not even the right book. Behind the gods, there's a portrayal of the goddess Maat here at the top, symbolizing the truth that must be upheld as the gods determine the purity and worthiness of Ani. There's also Ani appearing before Osiris, a little replay of the weighing of the heart, and Thoth, with the scribe instruments again, ready to record what is occurring. He is going to record the truth as portrayed here as his pen is writing on the Maat feather, or the truth ostrich feather there. So these are all symbols of kind of the judgment or the declaration of innocence that has to be determined by this group and community of gods. This leads us to the final tableau of the papyrus. I love this picture. It represents real hopes and aspirations for the afterlife as held by the Egyptians. Here, Ani and his wife are in the attitude of worship and approaching the god. What is beautiful is what awaits the couple on the other side as they are welcomed into the community of the gods. Behind the table of abundant offerings is Taret, the hippo goddess. Taret is the goddess of fertility and nurturing and protection for pregnant women. She holds the ankh and the calf leg, both symbols of life and creation. Hathor, the cow goddess of love, emerges from the field of lotuses, where sits the tomb of Ani. All these together suggest a beautiful home awaiting for Ani and his family, where lies the abundance of life and love and the lushness suggested by the field of lotuses. This is the final rest for the worthy, as well as the end of the papyrus.